Dámy a páni, milí naši hostia, príjemný dobrý deň. Som rada, že vás teda môžem privítať na už druhom dni Medzinárodnej technologickej konferencie Slovakia Tech Forum Expo Košice 2023, ktorá je zameraná na vedu, výskum a inovácie. My sa nachádzame v sále číslo 2. Vy dnes môžete pendlovať medzi 3 sálami. Tú hlavnú už poznáte, pretože v nej o 9:00 odštartoval program. Jedna sa nachádza aj hore na poschodí, kde prebiehajú naozaj zaujímavé diskusie. Nenechajte si ujsť ani expo výstavu, ktorá patrí našim univerzitám. No a my, teda ako som povedala, sa nachádzame na pódiu Volvo Car Stage, ktoré podporil práve náš dnešný, aj včerajší hlavný partner, ktorým je Volvo, ako aj Slovenská agentúra pre rozvoj investícií a obchodu a taktiež Centrum vedecko-technických informácií. A nespomínam ich náhodou. Volvo si totižto pre vás pripravilo veľmi zaujímavé predstavenie jej spoločnosti, ktorá ako švédska automobilka otvára svoj závod vo Valalikoch pri Košiciach. Tak sa pozrime, čo vlastne všetko pre nás chystá.
If you want to be part of something new, something exciting from the very start and want an adventure in your life and maybe with your family, I think this is the project.
My name is Elin. I started here about 3 years ago and I started as an operator. I showed my team leader that I wanted to learn new things. After that, I got the opportunity to become a team leader. So, of course, I took it because I really like this. Since I'm born and raised here in Udržateľná, I've always known about the company. A lot of my friends have worked here and my friends' family, where their parents have worked here. It's opened a lot of doors for young people. So I definitely think it will be the same in Košice in Slovakia.
I really feel that this is the project to be a part of, to start from the beginning and also be building something new. And I feel very high energy from the team.
My name is Michael. I'm 35 years old. I'm from the Gothenburg region. I'm working with logistics, so I'm a forklift operator. I have the ability to upskill. I have the ability to learn. I'm getting a lot of support from my superiors. I'm the most proud of that I've shown that I can be a valuable asset for the team.
To be part of the creation of a complete new era for Volvo, to establish Volvo cars in Slovakia is something fantastic, and to be part of it from the beginning.
It's a unique opportunity. If you are an engineer and you really want to demonstrate your skill and you want to learn very fast, there cannot be a better project that you should jump on it.
Tak to bolo predstavenie Volva, ktoré otvára svoj závod vo Valalikoch pri Košiciach. Možno sme mnohých z vás práve v tejto chvíli inšpirovali, lebo ako som sa rozhliadala, v tejto sále je aj mnoho mladých, sviežich tvári, tak možno je to príležitosť, kde odštartovať svoju kariéru. A možno nájdete aj veľa podnetných tipov, kde to bude smerovať vo vašej budúcnosti, aj, ako som už spomínala, v Expe, ktoré patrí práve objavom našich univerzít, takže veľa inšpirácie je dostupnej aj tam. Môžete si vypočuť aj mnohé workshopy. Kto má chuť sa trošku odreagovať, pozývame vás na testovacie jazdy na vozidlách, elektrovozidlách, ktoré zapožičala práve švédska automobilka Volvo. Skúste vyskúšať, či sa bude na tom jazdiť naozaj tak dobre, ako to ohlasujú. No a taktiež vás pozývame medzi 10. a 12. Pokojne sa zastavte, na poschodí prebieha AI alebo AI klinika na tému environmentálnych a sociálnych víziev. Dnes to však bude na tomto pódiu hlavne o zelených témach. Mnoho z vás v sále, tiež aj keď som vchádzala, som si všimla, že teda ste mnohí ochrancovia, milovníci prírody. Viete, ako som to zistila? No proste máte účesť na ježka. No ale pri tej zelenej budúcnosti, ono to nestačí totižto, ak chceme našim generáciám zanechať zelenú planetu, aby sme mali len teda trendy účesť ale je potrebné, aby sme aj v tej hlave, nielen na hlave, mali niečo a ideálne je, ak je to poriadna dávka rozumu. A ak to teda ten rozum všetko nepokrie do budúcnosti, lebo ešte stále sa naša planéta borí s mnohými problémami, ktoré sú práve proti tej zelenej, tak vtedy je lepšie asi použiť umelú inteligenciu. Asi nás nikoho neprekvapuje, že umelá inteligencia už je bežnou súčasťou našich životov a to v tejto chvíli nemám absolútne na mysli umelú inteligenciu, ktorou sa prezentujú niektoré naše celebrity na sociálnych sieťach a ktoré potom mnohí mladí nasledujú, často bezhlavo. Ideálne je, ak je to tá umelá inteligencia, ktorá dokáže písať eseje, ktorá vymýšľa vtipy, ktorá kreslí, programuje, vedie rozhovory, často vyhľadáva škaredé pejoratíva na internete, ale v konečnom dôsledku predikuje, pamätá si a dokonca manipuluje verejnú mienku. Žijeme naozaj tzv. Dobu sci-fi. Umelá inteligencia napomáha našej spoločnosti napredovať, uľahčuje prácu ľudí, odmremeňuje ľudské zdroje. Otázkou však je, aká môže byť aj tá jej odvrátená strana, lebo určite sme všetci videli tie sci-fi filmy, kde sa práve umelá inteligencia ako si vymkla spod kontroly a začala si raziť vlastnú cestu. Je práve toto hrozbou našej budúcnosti? Dáma, ktorú teraz privítame na pódiu, nám možno aj na toto odpovie. V každom prípade je odborníčkou na umelú inteligenciu a obchodné stratégie, udržateľnosť a zodpovednosť. Pomáha spoločnostiam orientovať sa v zložitom prostredí umelej inteligencie. No a ako rečník je vynikajúca, pretože dokáže zaujať svoje publikum. V konečnom dôsledku to budeme práve o pár minút počuť a prináša perspektívne a podnetné myšlienky práve pri aplikácii umelej inteligencie v podnikaní a v spoločnosti. Dámy a páni, privítajme Elin Hauge.
On a very dark and rainy Tuesday evening, about 2 years ago, in November, I attended an event in Oslo for business leaders in the electrical grid industry. I was there to talk about artificial intelligence, obviously. But before I went on stage, they did a Kahoot session. And one of the questions in that Kahoot session was, what is the most important action that your company can take towards achieving the UN sustainability goals? The most predominant answer was digitalization of products and services. That's when it struck me that we tend to think that anything digital is sustainable because these data are just floating wirelessly around in the air without leaving footprints. Or perhaps they do. First, we need to talk a little bit about this current AI hype. Now, I worked in the AI space for quite a few years, and AI has been a topic within research since the 60s. But when ChatGPT was launched end of November last year, suddenly the world had AI here. And suddenly everybody is talking about artificial intelligence. Throughout the history of Homo sapiens, about 200,000 years, whenever there's something we don't understand, we tend to dedicate it to some kind of divine force. Early years, we sacrificed goats, sometimes children, and food. These days, we talk about singularity. And now the big fear is that singularity is coming to take over the world. But we need to talk about what AI really is about. It's about mathematics and statistics applied to large amounts of data. Even to languages. And this is really the natural next step. Now, I worked in the insurance industry for quite a few years, and we worked on these large big data and warehouse projects. How many of you have worked on big data and warehouse projects? No, yeah, there's a couple. And they're above 25, yeah. Point is that we invested a lot of money in these big warehouse projects. We didn't really reap any value, but we did work on it. And then for the last decade, the consulting industry in particular has been promoting digital transformation. How many of you have worked on digital transformation in some format? Right, so quite a few more hands. Now, we have the data, we have the processes, digital processes. The next natural step is to apply some logic to these data and these processes. Agreed? Right. We apply mathematics and statistics to these processes and these data. To confuse ourselves, we call it artificial intelligence. But really what we're talking about is maths and statistics applied to large amounts of data. Or in the last year and a half, we've seen the emergence of large language models and generative image models. How many of you have tested the DALL-E or Stable Diffusion or other image applications? Like, there's a few. Okay, that means that those of you who didn't raise your hand, you should test how these image generators actually work. And then, end of November last year, ChatGPT came to the market. And ChatGPT is kind of like, now, we've been talking about Volvo, we're in a car manufacturing region. So ChatGPT is kind of like the chassis of the car. Underneath that chassis, there's an engine, and we call it GPT. Currently, the model is GPT-4. But that's just one brand of cars. We have the Metas, we have the Googles, Microsoft is working also on the GPT-4, but we have Baidu and other companies in the Middle East and other parts of the world as well, working on large language models. But then really what is perhaps even more interesting is what we call tabular data, good old data in structured data, like rows and columns. We call it tabular data and structured models. The protein folding model from AlphaFold is a huge step forward in the pharma industry, but we don't really talk that much about it because we're all focused on ChatGPT. But when we talk about AI, we really need to remember that ChatGPT isn't equal to AI. It's just one of the tools in a very, very large toolbox. We have computer vision, which means anything from interpreting and classifying images to generating images. Then we have the large language models, like GPT. And how many of you have used ChatGPT, by the way? Yeah, so quite a few. Very, very good. How many of you have used Bing? Yeah, so a few hands, but not as many as ChatGPT. Now, Bing is using actually GPT-4 as its engine, and then they combined it with a bit of search, but it is still one of these virtual assistants that belongs to the category of large language models. And then we have frequency models. So in the car industry, for example, it is really important in the manufacturing lines to talk about frequency models and timelines, for example, to detect errors occurring. And then we have any kind of structured data, such as predictive maintenance or recommendation engines of various kinds. Now, we're here in a green tech track. So let's have a little look at some of the really interesting use cases from a green tech and sustainability perspective. I know there will be a talk later today about buildings and how to use AI to make buildings more sustainable and more efficient. Brainbox is a Canadian-based company. They're also in Europe. And what they do is basically to use AI to optimize the use of a building with focus on lighting, heating, and cooling, such as connecting to the HVAC system. And really, if you think about it, buildings represent about 40% of the power consumption of the world related to lighting, heating, and cooling. 40%, that's a lot. So it really makes sense to use AI to optimize how we use these buildings. There are many startups, in particular in the Nordics, but I'm pretty sure you have some of them here in Slovakia too, in this prop tech space. And then let's have a look at another case. I'm Norwegian, and the fish farming industry is huge in Norway. It represents an annual revenue for Norway of about 13 billion euros. That's a lot of money. And the salmon production, the salmon farming, is maybe the most important part of this. We tend to think that fish farming, that's sustainable, isn't it? It's fish, healthy food, we use the oceans. Hang on a sec. It's not sustainable. Actually, it's quite the opposite. First of all, there are huge issues with lice and diseases, so they need to use a lot of medication in the farms, in the sea, which means that it has a huge impact on the surrounding ecosystem in the ocean. And then they lose a lot of fish. A lot of fish dies because there's so many fish in one farm, and because they're not really living a very healthy life, a lot of them die. And beneath the farm, at the bottom of the fjord, there's a whole lot of sludge from medication, from excess fodder, and from the remains of the fish. Huge issues. That's why there's a lot of companies in Norway, but I would assume in many other countries working on fish farming as well, to use technology to improve the sustainability of the fish farming, such as monitoring and using computer vision to monitor the fish and also to analyze the water conditions in the fish farms. And then there's a third case I'd like to bring up. It's a tram, a bit closer to the car industry perhaps. We have trams in Oslo, which typically most big cities have. The new trams in Oslo, they have 12,000 sensors. 3,000 of these send real-time data back to the central. And the frequency is about, 24 to 254 milliseconds. The rest send the data during nighttime. Now, the purpose of this is, of course, to optimize the energy consumption, because these are electrical trams, and also to predict maintenance requirements, so basically to maintain these trams in a more cost-efficient way, but also to monitor, predict, and model the traffic patterns in the capital. I think the number is 87 new trams in total. But we also need to talk about the flip side. And that's why I'm here. It's because we tend to think that anything digital is sustainable and that AI is going to save or solve all our sustainability issues, but it's not that simple. And the first point I want to bring up is destabilization of our societies, because these tools have a significant potential for impacting such as democratic processes. The news feed, how information is spread in our societies. But not just that, it also has the potential of creating a separation of our societies through discriminatory practices. And we really need to talk about human versus machine alignment. And one of the big issues from an ethical perspective internationally right now is how can we align the values of these underlying models with us as humans? Now, this should have been an afternoon session with a bit of red wine to it, because this question is rather tricky. Now, if you think about it, these large language models, such as GPT, it has the potential of giving quite a lot of varied feedback, depending on how you ask your questions. But who decides which guardrails to put around them? Which set of values should we use? Slovak values? European values in general? Should we decide for the rest of the world? Or maybe we should let the Chinese decide, because they are one of the largest or the largest population of the world. Should we let them decide on a global scale? Or maybe the Americans? You get my point. We are getting ourselves into an impossible discussion because we are not able to define a global set of fundamental values for how we want to put guardrails around these large language models. And then there's a question of bias. Now, bias is just a preference in a data set, fundamentally, from a technical perspective. And whichever way we look at it, in any data set, there will be bias. I read some kind of article this morning from Education, and it talked about the efforts to remove bias. That's a completely misunderstood discussion. Whichever way we look at it, any data set is only a subset of the world. Whichever way we look at it. Which means that there will always be bias in any data set. There will always be. But if it's a bias of red screws versus blue screws, it doesn't really matter, does it? But if we talk about gender, ethnicity, sexual preferences, political views, that's when it really matters. Do you know the Amazon case a few years ago where they wanted to create an AI for talent acquisition? No? Okay, then I'll go through it very quickly because it has a very interesting fundamental problem. So Amazon wanted to create an AI tool for recruitment. I mean, which big company wouldn't like to have that? I'm pretty sure Volvo would like to have one too. Because that would simplify the search for the right talents, right? If you could have some AI to kind of point out which talents to recruit. So they tried. They started with a data set, they developed an algorithm. The algorithm did predict which candidates to recruit. But there was a problem. Because the algorithm recommended men. Is that a problem? No, it is a problem when there's no women in the recommendation. Okay, so they realized, Houston, we have a problem. We need to go back to our data set, remove all references to gender. Try again. Okay, they tried again. They had removed everything related to gender, or so they thought. Because the second time around, the algorithm still recommended men. Exactly. And so they realized that we are not able to remove the gender references in this text because they are hidden. Now, if we think back to what happens with the language models like GPT, we all now realize that these algorithms on language, they are a bit smarter than us humans sometimes. So even if it doesn't say he or she, these algorithms realize, based on the words used, which gender the owner of the CV has. Okay, so the next year around, Amazon tried again. They came prepared. They had developed a data set where they thought they had removed everything related to gender. Or so they thought. This time around, the algorithm had changed a bit because now it recommended men without education. What is the fundamental problem here? Is it the gender of the data scientists? The color of the data scientists? Size of the data scientists? No, it's not. What is the problem? It's us humans standing in front of a huge mirror. It's the human behavior through 2 decades. Human decision-making, human behavior, human preferences, documented in the data sets that we train the algorithms on. And then human stupidity comes into this when we turn around and think that, oh, we trained the algorithms on our history, now they will represent the future we want. They won't. The algorithms will only replicate the behavior it is trained on, which is extremely human. And we humans, we are not necessarily good in everything we do. We tend to be selfish, power-loving. We don't like people that are different from us, discriminatory in many ways. We've always been like that. It's just that we need to realize that when we give these data to the algorithms, we are standing in front of a mirror and we see our own very human behavior. And that is why bias is a challenge. Okay, there's another sustainability issue here. It's called cybersecurity. Now, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, and that's not really why I'm here. But I really do want to point out that in this generative AI space, we get a whole new dimension of problems. Now, Nicolai Tangen, he is the head of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's worth about 1.4 trillion US dollars, so rather a lot of money. And he is more concerned about cybersecurity than he is about how the stock markets are doing. When he started his job in the Sovereign Wealth Fund, he was tested by his own security department. And it was really simple. So any leader who has worked with media knows that when you're interviewed by a journalist, you ask to see the article before it is published. Yes? Right. So he was interviewed by a journalist he thought he knew by email. So he wrote back some answers about his summer vacation and really all nice and friendly. He got an email in reply a few days later where he could click a link to check the article. And what did he do? He clicked the link and boom, he opened the door for the cyber attack. Now this sounds really mundane, but you know, the biggest challenge in cybersecurity is us humans. And in this generative AI space, where we have AI that can create so much content, deepfakes, where we don't really manage to differentiate between real and fake images, voices, videos, even fingerprints, we will be fooled. You will be fooled. And this is going to be a huge challenge moving forward. And then, of course, another challenge here is poisoning of data, because anybody who manages to get access to the databases used to train the algorithms can poison the algorithms with unimaginable consequences. Right, but let's dig into the real sustainability issues here. Power consumption of the data centers of the world is an obvious challenge. The data centers of the world are currently using somewhere between 1 and 1.7% of the world's total energy consumption. That's excluding the transmission networks. Is that a lot? Well, it's about 10 times the power consumption of Slovakia. So, I don't know. I would say it's a lot. And we have two challenges. One is the source of the power, and then the other one is the amount. In Ireland, data centers in 2022 used as much as 18% of the total power consumption in Ireland. Denmark has an estimated 15% in 2030. These are just two numbers from Europe. I didn't manage to find the number for Slovakia. But it's an interesting perspective. Now, let's have a look at what Meta tried to do a year and a half ago in the Netherlands. Now, Meta wanted to build a new data center to fuel WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook for Europe with a new data center. They wanted to place it in Zeewolde in the Netherlands. At first, the politicians and the local citizens were positive because it would mean new employment for a lot of people. However, they soon came to realize that this data center would require as much electricity as a city of 460,000 people. It would require an area of 165 hectares of fertile land, which is equal to 231 international-sized soccer fields. in a Europe with a grain disaster, both because of drought and war, this area could produce grain enough for 2.8 million loaves of bread. Meta faced so much resistance that they decided not to do it and rather pursue another opportunity. But before we move on to that one, let's have a look at what recently happened in Norway. Nammo is one of the largest producers of ammunition, also currently for Ukraine. They needed to expand their ammunition production because of the ongoing war. In the same region, Green Mountain is building a new data center for TikTok. And suddenly, we had a challenge because there wasn't enough capacity in the grid to provide power to both the new data center for TikTok and the ammunition production for the weapon industry. So suddenly, the question was kitten videos or ammunition. This problem was solved, though. But it brings up a really interesting perspective on the problems that we're going to have in so many societies around the world in the coming years. Now back to Meta. Currently, they're working on plans to build a data center in Talavera de la Reina. It's southwest of Madrid, in a region where 25% of the grain production of Spain happens. I don't know how much you know about the current situation of drought in Spain, but in this region, 80 to 90% of the yield of this year's production is destroyed by drought. Now, in this same region, Meta wants to build this data center that will require 665 million liters of water per year, peak hours 195 liters per second. In a region where drought is a huge problem. Of course, water can be recycled. It's expensive, not so easy. And a lot of the water from the cooling systems also goes up into the air as steam. So possible to solve, but not quite straightforward. Now, another problem of the data center industry is the carbon footprint. So depending on how you calculate, the carbon footprint of the ICT industry is somewhere between 1.4 and 3.9% of the global carbon footprint. The aviation industry is on 2%. According to Ericsson researcher, this can be reduced by 80% if the entire industry transitions to green energy. I wish it was that simple to get the politicians to agree to that. Now, if we look at the AI industry, we don't really know the numbers for GPT-4, but for GPT-3, we know that one training round would require as much electricity as about 130 households for a year. One training round. There are many of these language models around the world. Some of them are much easier to train. Some of them are as heavy as GPT. NVIDIA is working on these GPUs for this industry. And there's a lot happening in increasing the efficiency, both in methods and architecture and hardware. But this is really a challenge that we need to solve. And then, when we're done with the digital part, here comes the hardware part. Let's see, if the hardware works. Now it works. In anything related to digital, there will be electronic devices. You probably already have your pockets full of them as well. Smartphones and a whole lot of other gadgets. 80% of their environmental footprint is related to the manufacturing process, which includes the semiconductor industry, of course. It requires a lot of precious metals, a lot of water, a lot of electricity. is worse than the automotive industry, actually. And when we don't need them anymore, they become waste. And in 2022, there were about 16 billion smartphones on this planet, and 5.3 billion of these became waste in 1 year. Now, they're about 9 millimeters thick, and if we put them all on top of each other, we would get 1/8 to the moon. That's about 120 times higher than the International Space Station. Just with smartphones we threw away in 1 year. So in total, this year, we can estimate the total e-waste of this planet to be about 60 million metric tons. Well, how much is that? It's just a big number, isn't it? Well, this summer, okay, let's see if this electronics can work. Ah, there it works. Excellent. The USS Gerald R. Ford visited Oslo, fully loaded with personnel and fuel. Well, this is nuclear-driven. It weighs about 91,000 metric tons. So the total waste we will produce this year would be equal to about 660 fully loaded USSR Gerald Fords. That is a lot. And if we look at the numbers when it comes to the human toll, according to the World Health Organization, 18 million children and 13 million women in childbearing age are currently in significant health risk because of working in this informal waste management industry. There is regulation coming from the European Union on artificial intelligence. One of the things that this regulation will include is a requirement for the providers of the AI models to document their sustainability measures and their impact on the environment. There are a whole lot of other things we could talk about around the coming AI Act, but that is for another session. For now, I would like to summarize the question of whether AI is sustainable with the following. AI is the natural next step. It is here to stay. However, it is not sustainable per se. So when we in the current hype talk about AI as the solution to all sustainability issues, we need to remember that AI is about maths. It is only sustainable to the extent we actually make it sustainable because of all these flip sides related to humans, society, energy, water, hardware, to mention a few. So it's up to us to think both on the benefits and the flip side. Now, before moving to the final bullet of my summary, I'd like to open for questions. And I know that you have already asked a few questions. I have them here on my screen. So I will just read them up and then I will answer. So should we stop digitalization and ban AI altogether? Well, as I said, AI is the natural next step. It is about applying mathematics to a large amount of data in our digital process. No, we can't ban it. It's already out there. Digitalization, it is here. We can't turn back time or stop it, and I don't think that makes sense either, because there are so many use cases where it really does make sense to use these tools. But we need to keep in mind that digital is not sustainable per se. We need to be able to think through two thoughts at the same time. Next question. So in the light of AI, what are my thoughts on the need for lifelong learning? Okay, Katarina, can I have another hour? No, okay. This is a really, really important question, because I believe that we are now in a paradigm shift when it comes to learning. Because our experienced resources, anybody beyond 45, myself included, we are not ready for retirement. We are going to work for the next 25, 30 years. And we need to make sure that we are relevant. We are only relevant if we manage to keep up with the technology. And the solution is also not to just hire a lot of newly educated people, because unless they studied computer science, maths, physics, or data science, they also don't have a clue about how these data and algorithms actually work. Right? So this is something we really need to do together. And the only way to do that in a way where we maintain an experienced workforce is by realizing that we also need to go back to school. Not in the conventional way, but we need to take a bigger responsibility for our own learning than just a little bit of micro-learning here and there. That is not going to be enough. So yes, lifelong learning definitely needed. I'll use myself as an example. I have a couple of master's degrees in maths and physics a while ago. I just started studying law, because I think that the combination of tech understanding and law is going to be really, really important in the years to come. So next question. The momentum of AI seems unstoppable. How should we approach the challenges of ensuring sustainable AI on a global level? Oh yeah, that's a big question. UN is working on their approach to AI. They're also inviting advisors in now to work on this question. European Union, of course, working on the current phase of the regulation. And hopefully the European Union will be able to conclude on this regulation within end of the year, beginning of next year. And we do need regulation. G7 countries have agreed on a meta level to collaborate. Well, those are all loose words, right? But there is at least a global understanding that we need to collaborate globally on regulation. The problem is that we haven't done this before, right? So this is a completely new challenge. We have to collaborate in ways we have never done before. And we will fail in some ways. I am so sure that the new AI Act from European Union will cause a lot of friction. Some things in the Act won't work. Yes, let's just accept that. But we really, really do need to do it. We will fail, we will succeed in some areas, we will learn, and then we move on. So let's just hope that we succeed in doing that. I do have a little bit more time. If there are any other questions from the room, I would be happy to take them. Feel free to just ask. If not, I'll throw in another question from by myself. Oh, here's the question. Yes?
You said something about the values. Which values? The Chinese, US, or European values should AI use?
Yeah.
What is your own opinion?
Okay, so the question is the fundamental question of which values to train the large language models on. What is my opinion? My opinion is that, or let's say my viewpoint is that we won't be able to define a fundamental set of values for these large language models. There are some basic things, like child pornography. We all agree that they should not answer anything related to that. But when it comes to politics, democracy, a whole lot of other things, we won't be able to agree. And I think it would be fundamentally wrong to agree as well, because from an application perspective, we would want, on a global perspective, that these foundation models are just that they are foundation models. They should not be let out to the general audience, just like that. They are foundation models. On top of those, there will be hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of applications. And for each of those applications, for each specific use case and each region where those use cases are applied, that's where we need to put in the values. Because then it makes sense, right? answered your question? Yes. Other questions? Oh, there's a question over there. Yes, shoot, please. Use AI as a... Oh, probably a bazillion. The question was, any ideas for how to use AI in an experiment, areas for testing? I'd say, let's have a chat after this talk, because there's probably a bazillion things that you could test. And there was one more question here, yes?
Do you think it's a good idea to conquer or work with the AI? Like humans?
Oh, is it a good idea to use AI tools as part of your everyday work? I would say most definitely. So what we see, for example, in the tech and IT industry, is that developers are using these large language models as a very important tools in creating base code and even converting legacy code from, say, COBOL to something more usable, to writing the explanations of the code. And across all industries, we see examples of how to use AI tools such as generative AI and language models to support what you already do. So the question I would throw in was, will your jobs be lost? Perhaps. Some jobs will disappear. A lot of new jobs will appear, such as in cybersecurity, and a whole lot of jobs we haven't even thought of yet. But the most important part are the ones that will change, the jobs that will change. And they will change because of generative AI changing the landscape, but also generative AI becoming a tool. So I think that all of you should test AI tools in your everyday work. Get acquainted with them. And that brings me to my final point. AI is a toolbox. At home, I have a very physical toolbox. In that toolbox, there's a hammer. I can choose to use that hammer to hit myself over the head. It's going to be bloody painful. I might even die. Or I can use that same hammer to do something useful at home. The AI toolbox is the same. It is up to you to decide whether you want to become victims or masters of this toolbox. And I just want to give you one final quote before I finish off. It is up to us, the humans, to design a future of technology that is human more, not human less. Thank you.
Váš potlesk patril Elin Hauge. It seems the momentum of AI seems unstoppable. Thank you.